Just press the button that shows up at the center of your screen. Hi, I'm David March, and welcome to the latest episode of Land of Confusion with my new co-host, Flicker, who's decided to join up with us. And today we're interviewing Ole Summers, who I saw was hanging around on the boards and said, hey, let's get that guy on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So Ole, you grew, we sent you the brief, you sent us a brief bio. I see that you started living in Texas. What was it like growing up in Texas?
Well, at the time I did, of course, my family's been in Texas for a long time, a few generations now, but it was a pretty rural place compared to what it is today. You know, we were basically, I didn't live in a house that had plumbing until I was probably about the 6th grade or something like that. And I think the first air conditioned room I was ever in was when I got to college in the athletic dorm, and that was one little wall unit stuck in a concrete block over there. But we were it was pretty much the standard, what was then a standard 1950s kind of rural lifestyle. We ran a lot of cattle and trained a lot of horses and ate a lot of beans and anything else we could at the time anyway.
So what part of Texas are you from? East, west, north?
North Texas. We're about roughly an hour north of Dallas Fort Worth area, right before you get to the river. And at that time, it was still all agriculture. You know, pastures and a lot of farmland too. It's part of the soil up here is a big belt of blackland clay that runs all the way south to Waco and beyond. You know, it's a pretty productive kind of soil. It's black and waxy though. It's not a lot of fun when it rains a lot, but it can be pretty productive.
So is this more agricultural, or is this animal husbandry, or what kind of land territory is this?
Well, right now, it's mostly growing houses and malls, but at the time, it was a lot of cattle and a lot of wheat and some row crops, and there have been a lot of cotton, after the turn of the century into the 1920s and 30s and stuff like that as well, when some of that land broke up into smaller units and things like that.
So my first question is really, how old were you when you first sat on a horse?
Well, I've got a picture somewhere, and I was probably about that tall, and and I had a diaper on, and an old throwaway hat that my grandfather had, and that was, and I was sitting in Dad's saddle then, all by myself.
That's pretty cool. It's a shame you don't have that picture. You can hold it.
Yeah. I'll have to break it out sometime, I guess. But I'll.
Or make it your time. Oh, by the way, is your name Ole or Ole?
No, I tell you, when I had to make I came up with that when I was trying to get a email address for mostly just be some just a kind of a limited access, and I used the name Summers because I'd used it a couple of times before, and then to make it a little bit more distinctive, it was actually going to be old, and to make it a little bit more distinctive, I just used the old English spelling because I knew probably no one would have that. Mm-hmm. And so I just stuck them together, and Summers is, I'd used it a couple of times back when I was young, and I needed a alternate name sometimes at some of the rodeos I was in. And probably my favorite fictional character from when I was a kid was an old mountain man, and in Guthrie's trilogies about the mountain men, the big sky, and the way west and all that stuff. An old man named Dick Summers, and so I just stole his name at the time, and then when I decided to use that, that's where I came up with the old LE anyway.
Cool.
Very cool.
So
So
you were
before I,
okay.
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so you grew up in Texas, but and your family's a cattle. So how big was your spread, I guess?
Oh, we didn't own that much private land ourselves, but we ran a lot of what we would call lease pasture, and probably would run another 3 or 4 miles beyond that, but now that is pretty well gone by the way. The path we're in, that land is worth too much, and you can't really keep lease pasture anymore. So the last year or two, I've pretty well cut everything back. It's mostly dad's anyway right now, and he's 92. He's not really jumping around a lot anymore, and so we pretty well had to cull back because we just didn't have a lot of place to put them anymore.
So do you do any ranching these days?
I'm sorry, do what?
Do you do any ranching these days?
Yeah, we keep just a few. We've just got that little core place with a few hundred acres, and we keep enough on there to kind of keep dad's tax exemption and try to keep them from taxing away from him. And that's basically what it's turned into within the last 12 months, truthfully. We lost a couple of pretty decent sized old pastures, and we just ran out of places to have them anymore, and sold them off. And plus it's just getting to where this part of the country right in here is not going to be very agricultural anymore, simply because of the growth that's coming out of the DFW area. Right below us, McKinney, Texas is considered to be the fastest growing city of its size, in the country. And Frisco, which is right beside it, is maybe building at a faster rate than they are, and then they're only a few miles away, actually. So
When you say long, do you mean that you sold it voluntarily?
oh no, it was sold by the landowners. We had it under lease, and that's not anything you can, somebody comes along and offers you $10,000 or $12,000 an acre for a place that you only see once a year or something. That's it's not too, it's fairly understandable that you let it go.
Yeah. So you were growing up there as a kid. So did you have any kind of wild, crazy adventures as a kid there? Or is that more something that came in when you started becoming joined the rodeo?
Oh, I don't know. We were we were a little bit away from town. So anything I did, one way or the other, was going to be pretty well by myself, basically. But, until we started going to school, we were about 10 miles away from the town at that time. When I was about 6 years old, we moved in fairly close to town. When I was about 6th grade, we moved in right on the edge of what we would call a town then, and had it a little bit easier in that we actually had plumbing and a few things like that, and I could walk to school instead of ride the bus. But anyway, that was kind of the first time I was able to mix very, very much. I could walk into town and play ball with the town kids and stuff in the summertime if I could sneak off, between chores and stuff. But things like that. But
So how big
when,
was your
oh,
school?
go
Was
ahead.
it a
No, go ahead. Your turn.
I mean, I don't, I'm trying to get a picture. I'm trying to picture this in my mind. Was it a small school? Was it a,
Well,
how many students were there?
my graduating class had 25.
Okay.
Um, you know, wasn't a very good mix. I think we had 4 girls in it, so you kind of had to get out and go to another town. If you wanted too much excitement, but but we had roughly, probably at the time of high school, probably had 100 kids in it. I'm saying maybe, something like that. And but it was the same school that my dad and my mother had gone to, and they'd met there when they were in the 2nd grade. I guess was the first time they'd met.
Okay. So you mentioned that you were playing, your college years were mostly concerned with playing football and rodeoing. So which college did you end up going to?
I went to a couple of them. There's what would be classified the NCAA small college up here in Sherman, which is Austin College, which at that time we played an independent schedule and were pretty good. We finished number 5 in the nation one year for small college. But it was also, at that time, it would basically be between it and Rice for the highest ranked academic school in the state. And so that's the first time I really had to kind of bear down a little bit and I actually rubbed elbows with some people that you call intellectuals, I guess. And there were a couple of history teachers there who I connected with quite a bit. In fact, the first economics course I ever had was taught by Dick Armey, who was later, a congressman and everything. But that's before he went to North Texas State to teach over there. But it was fairly strong faculty. But my interest still tended to run more in other directions anyway, at least far as the way I spent my time.
So I'm still in your formative years here.
No problem. We can switch back. I'm sure he's capable.
Oh, sorry. I don't mean to.
No, we're still trying to. Me and Flicker have only done one other episode really together as a team, so we're still starting to get to learn each other as well for interviewing styles. So and it's no problem. Go ahead.
Oh, I have no interviewing style, but I'm just curious. When I asked you when you first sat on a horse, when did you first participate in a rodeo?
Well, I tell you, when I was born, each of my grandparents gave me a heifer calf, and they would manage that till I was 9, and then I pretty well had to make those decisions on my own after that. So I pretty well had my own money, and but I was expected to use it, with some judgment. And I bought my own horse to trade on when I was 11, and that I actually bought with my own money, and started basically trying to trade, and of course the way things normally work, a beginner's luck, you kind of hit it fairly good the first couple of times. You think you really got it figured out, and then then the ton of bricks hit you, about the time you think you got it figured out. So I learned in a hurry that everything doesn't always go right, but those are all good lessons.
Well, I'll switch back to the later years. So
Okay. Sure.
When you were in college there, so you ended up saying you managed to get yourself a couple of degrees, not just the standard one. What were those in?
I have a history degree, and then I also I transferred down to Stephen F. Austin, which is in Nacogdoches, Texas, and I've got a degree in agricultural animal science as well. And then of course I went ahead and got masters in those two, but by that time I'd begun to coach, and your time gets a little limited, and in between there were a couple of times in between coaching jobs where I actually managed a couple of fairly good sized ranches for some people, but I always ended up back coaching again.
And what were you coaching?
Football.
Okay.
This is Texas now. Okay.
Well,
it's football. Okay.
There might be baseball. I don't know.
Well, some people think that football in Texas is kind of a life and death matter, but it's much more serious than that. And
Go ahead, Dave. I'm still thinking about football.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so I'm really surprised by that because, like, for me, I'm from Canada, and I it still wraps my head around the fact that you get 4 downs, not 3, and you play a smaller field, and you get all this other stuff. So like,
that's a big game up there. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, pretty wide open, and
it leads to different types of tactics, mainly on the field. So you get a lot more field goals from what I can tell. So you were, but what did you do when you were doing the rodeo? What kind of work were you doing there? Because I will admit, a lot of what I know about this kind of stuff I get from watching Yellowstone.
Well, I hope you don't take too much of that completely seriously. I mean, no, I rode bulls and saddle broncs mostly. Yeah.
So you didn't use the rope. You didn't use a lasso or lariat.
Well, yeah, I could rope some. My dad was a pretty good roper, and his standard line is that I had to ride rough stock because I wasn't good enough cowboy to get a check with a rope. So so I had to stick my hand in the bull rope instead. But everybody in Texas can rope some.
I'm reminded of just recently a cowboy, I guess it was in Texas, a cowboy, a literal cowboy was going to Walmart, and he went on his horse.
Yeah.
You saw that?
I think I saw that. Yeah.
Well, I saw the video of it, and I was most impressed with the way the horse was standing, fully erect, and with the line just perfectly taut to this guy's feet. And I just thought, that's a well-trained horse.
Yeah, that's his job, is to keep the slack out. And that's what he's taught, keep that rope tight so you can get the other end and tie that thing. But I think I saw that too. It seemed like it was like 2 or 3 years ago now, but time kind of blurs down now. But I saw that. That was pretty cool thing.
I mean, in Pennsylvania, the Amish, they have like places for the horse and buggies at Walmart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you do so when you were coaching, were you doing for coaching for high schools, for colleges, or for or like AA, AAA kind of?
Oh, well, most of my coaching was in high schools and colleges here in Texas. Yeah. And for the most part, yeah.
Winning any championships?
Oh yeah. That's the idea.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
What position did you play in football when you were playing? When you were playing football, what position did you play?
I originally was a quarterback, but I got my arm hurt the first year at another school, and I knew enough about my own ground speed that I knew I'd have to switch positions, and that's when I went to Austin College, and I played defense in mostly in the secondary, at a safety and some corner, but mostly safety.
Yeah, I met a friend of a friend around here who played in the NFL, and he's like, but he was like third string, so he's like, I saw the field, like for 20 minutes the entire time I was in the NFL. But I mean, still, you got to do all the practices and all the other bonus stuff. So,
well, I still put him in a fairly narrow club. There aren't that many of them to say they got to the league for that long, for sure.
Yeah, when I met him, he was doing some diet supplements. It was like running this company for diet stuff. So apparently, when he was a football, he was this giant guy. But when I met him, it was like a foot shorter than me, and he was like even lighter than I am now. Which I was like, "You were playing in the NFL?" He's like, "Oh yeah." I was like huge then.
Yeah.
Well, if football is such a big thing in Texas, how do Texans react to the new Super Bowl with the woke ads and so forth?
I think generally it wasn't that well received, but it's. I think some people it probably depended on where they are on the scale as far as a fan or their own involvement. When you're coaching or you're part of another team, I would think it would be similar to, if you're part of let's just say that you're a player on a team in the NFL, you may not care much for that, but you've also got to, make rent next week too. And you got a fairly good check coming in for a very limited amount of time. And I think that's what most people felt. Just they're irritated by it. They may not be real taken by it, but when it comes time to kind of divorce yourself from it, as far as the pro end of it, it hadn't been that hard for me, because I kind of have gotten fed up with certain things, and I just don't support them anymore. But I'm still a nut. I still pull up game tapes and break them down in my mind and things like that, and just to see what people are trying to do, against this formation or this kind of action and stuff like that. I'm not much to follow any one team, and I never have been. I've been more about stuff like that and individual players. Even when I was a kid, I was more into, John Unitas and Larry Wilson and stuff like that than I was, any particular team, like that. But I think
you're never disappointed by the Cowboys.
Now, well, that when I was in high school, they just gotten to the position where they were in the playoffs and playing for a spot to get in the Super Bowl, and losing to Lombardi all the time to do it, But that was by the time I got to realize coaching myself, Coach Landry was getting them back into Super Bowls by that time.
So just looking at your bio one last time. So you're now guiding hunters in the fall. What are the hunters hunting?
I usually go to New Mexico. I've got a good friend up there who's a outfitter, and we'll hunt mostly elk and mule deer. And but I spent some time up in the mountains and stuff. My uncle had gone to Colorado shortly after the war, and that's where he lived out the rest of his life. And he'd outfitted up there some and had a big business and stuff up in there. So I was kind of familiar with that country. And then this individual I'm talking about is an old rodeo clown. He was a bullfighter, and we're probably kind of at the end of the deal. His he's pretty broken up right now. All those old injuries or stuff and things are starting to catch up with him. So we may not have about one more round of it, but I really enjoy it.
So what do you hunt?
Sorry, what was that?
Sorry. So what do you hunt?
What do you hunt?
Oh, yeah. As far as up there, we hunt elk and mule deer, some bear on occasions, and he'll normally hunt antelope. Sometime in August for about a week or two, something like that. But mostly we're talking about elk, mule deer, things like that. And of course, down here in Texas, we hunt whitetail deer, and Dad hunts quite a bit. And what I will do is normally guide up there until the beginning of November, and then I'll come back down here for the first weekend to hunt with Dad, and down here, and then spend about 2 weeks here, and then make my way back up there, depending on how much we're feeding cattle and things down here. But there won't be a lot of that anymore down here, I know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when you first said I hunt elk, and I'm like, why are you, and deer, and I'm like, what are you doing hunting like swamp doggies in Texas? So like, what's that?
Yeah. Yeah. But no, that's a special time. I enjoy. There are few sounds and few things that'll compare with sitting on the side of that old hill in the middle of fall and hear those elk bugle when they're out, when they're really trying to work the cow herds and stuff like that. And it's kind of a special time. I'd hate to think, I spent all that time coaching when I couldn't do it, and because of the timing and the time of year and everything. And right now it'd be hard to think of a fall without at least sitting up there and listening to it some, even if I'm hunting them or not.
Now, when you're, I'm just going to get into some political stuff now.
Yeah.
So did you guys, was your family like traditional Democrats or Republicans back then, or did they make you guys kind of switch over time as things shifted? Because,
well, at the time I was growing up, truthfully, very few counties in Texas would even bother to have a Republican primary or anything else. When you were running for office, you pretty well had to run a Democratic primary. That amounted to the election itself. But that was, and I'm sure there's probably a couple of other states down this way where this might have been true. I know it was true all through the South, but there were, as far as the Democratic Party, but in Texas, there were two definite wings, one a more conservative wing and one that was not. And that's kind of the way the vote would split up. Very few people would ever vote for Republicans. But, back in the day when Coke Stevenson was governor and that type of thing, that fraction was a more conservative branch. And then by the time you got into the 60s and you saw more of a consolidation, around the Republican side, because of, you could see that, strong trends by that time, inside the Democratic Party. And, but I think that was pretty well true all through by the time you got to the Nixon times and things like that. The lines were fairly well drawn by that time.
So you were raised a Democrat in a Democratic, sorry. You were raised a Democrat in a Democrat state, and right?
Mhm.
Well, yeah.
And when did you become a Republican?
Well, I think it was more a matter of realizing that you're a conservative. You know, you were raised conservatively. You know, there
Mhm.
because I think even inside the Democratic Party, particularly within the 30s and 40s and 50s, here in Texas anyway, there was probably a really what today we would call a conservative wing, really strong conservative wing, and they would be going head to head with everyone else, you know. And I think being raised, you know, it was just a matter of values, really. You know, when a lot of the people, the Coach Stevenson crowd, and all those people today would be considered by far conservative, and some of them would even be considered far right conservative. But they knew from the time beginning in Reconstruction, you know, that you weren't going to get elected, you know, unless you at least had the name, you know, Democrat by your name, you know. I'll give you an example. My dad's first cousin, who is older than he, was in the state Senate for a while and was president of the Senate, and for a short time he was lieutenant governor. But when he quit, he was a more or less a consultant and a lawyer type down there in Austin. But I remember when I was a kid, the first time that Ann Richards ran for state office, she'd been on the county court there in Travis County, and I was probably, I don't know how old I was probably a teenager or preteen, and I remember one of the older relatives asked GC, you know, what he thought of her, and if he would vote for her for treasurer, which is what she was running for at the time. And he said, I'd vote for her for queen if it get her off the Travis County court. He didn't have a hope. You know, so there's two different worldviews there, but they were all contained within that same party for a while. And then as the options kind of grew, you know, it kind of, but that was kind of the unique history, but because of everything that happened after the war between the states and that type of thing.
Yeah. And now it is fully basically a Republican forever from what I'm hearing from certain people. Are you worried about all the migration coming in around you that seems to be from out of state?
Yeah, but right now, most of the polling and most indications that we get right now is that it's just that first wave who are simply fed up with the way it is everywhere else, so that they basically maintain a fairly conservative profile when they get here, if they don't already have it. But now, I am of course concerned if they chase too many of them out, you know, we'll end up with them over here. But the problem, I don't see it being a problem right now. The problem is just we're getting a lot more people. Hopefully that'll also give us a little bit more sway in Congress and some things like that. But Texas will always draw an awful lot of outside money because there's an awful lot of votes here. You know, we're gaining seats in the Congress, so obviously we're going to gain electorally as well. And you know, that's why people like Benito O'Rourke or you know, Little Robbie can run that close, is because you have so much of a great influx, you know, of outside dollars flowing in here from the East Coast and the West Coast. And you know, if I'm not mistaken, I think barely more than 10 or 15% of his, contributions came from Texas.
Right.
And it came from outside. And when you see that big chest there, you think he's got a good chance, but the fact is, as long as he's who he is, probably not.
Yeah. Trying to tell everyone you can't have a gun in Texas seemed like a bad plan, but
it's not a good start. No.
Or an F-15.
Oh yes, we were talking a little bit about that before the show.
Yeah, that's
apparently that is a very it's something that Biden says a lot. He thinks it's not something he just said off the cuff one time. Apparently he says this a lot during the election campaign and even in his Senate years or vice presidency, where he just makes that line, and it's like, dude, you do know about that war in Afghanistan, that where the Taliban are armed with nothing but rifles and holding off pretty good.
Yeah, and most of those kinds of things, and that's a very, very good example, is the Afghans. But when you're, no matter how many planes you got and anything else, you have to take that ground that guy's standing on one way or the other. And he'll defend it. If he's determined to defend it, then things aren't quite that simple. I don't know if I'm not sure what process Mr. Biden uses sometimes mentally, but it's always, it was always a little clouded, but it hasn't, the horizon hasn't cleared very well in the last few years, for sure.
But it sounds more like today he means it. This is Swalwell who said we can nuke them, and now Biden is saying we can nuke you, and it seems like he's really trying to provoke something. And today, one of the there was a link on Ricochet to I think a guy named Korea or something like that, Monster Hunters.
Oh yeah, Larry Correa. Yep.
Yeah. And he was just saying, bring it on. You don't know what you're messing with. We will decimate you. And that's, of course, refreshing to hear. But the very thought that people are even thinking this way just boggles my mind, that they're actually really, really gaming out a civil war.
Yeah.
And that the president is going for it. The president is saying, we'll bring in F-15s.
It's like, who's going to fly them? Because a lot of the people who are the military right now, the rank and file, come from what they call the red states, right? You might have your officer corps that might be coming from the blue states, but the rank and file, they're just going to take their stuff and go home where their families are, and I don't see that working out long term. I mean, kind of worked in the last Civil War because the South ended up with with the best troops and the best generals, but that became a material war. But I also remember something, a guy named Michael Walsh, and he's shown up a couple times on some of the podcasts on Ricochet, and he said the problem with these people is they can't change a tire. How are they going to fight a war?
Right. It's not just the pilots that you have to worry about. It's the people that maintain the planes and the tanks.
Yeah. Yeah. But I just meant more in general that, a lot of the wokesters that are burning down the cities, they don't know how to make anything. Is more what his point is. It's sort of like they've been grown up in these families where their parents took care of them until they were 18, 19, and now they're hitting the real world and discovering the real world is going to respect them and isn't going to push all the obstacles out of their way for them. And you got Walsh was at some speech, and he's giving a speech at a university, and some woman comes up and says, "You're a racist, homophobic, blah 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 blah," and he turns to her and he says, "You don't know me. How do you know any of this stuff? Where do you learn any of this?" And you know what her response was? Tears. And he's like, these people can't even change car tires. Like, how are they going to overthrow the government? So a lot of the progressive people who are loudest right now are not the type of people. They sound like revolutionaries, but they'll get pushed aside pretty easily if they run into trouble.
Yeah, I think, one of the points I was trying to make earlier, in the year somewhere, this is all these great, movements and things like that aren't centered on liberty. There are power people behind every one of them. They're going to be involved in them in some way. It doesn't matter. And there's always a guillotine line there. You may be the one at the moment who's hollering the loudest and think you're being pushed to the front, but we're all standing in the guillotine line as long as those people are there. It's just a matter of what the positioning is. Mm-hmm. And if AOC thinks she's not standing in that line, she's mistaken, because there's a basket for her head too. And when it's all over, those same people that were standing there next to Napoleon are still going to be standing next to whoever's left in there, the same type of people. Mm-hmm. And the only way is that you construct that deal not around all these little fragmented thoughts, but around the idea of liberty and trying to maintain it, not only acquire it, but then probably being able to maintain it is probably the bigger challenge, truth, after you get it.
Certainly we have talked, me and C. Writer had talked on a few podcasts about what things would look like, and it's like there's just a lot of these people don't even know where their food comes from anymore.
Yeah,
it's like the food comes from the supermarket. It's like, no, there's a process before it gets to the supermarket. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their naivete is astounding. Mm-hmm. Just how to run a city. I don't think they have the comprehension of how their city runs, what actually goes into it 24 hours a day to keep their refrigerator on and their refrigerator stocked.
Mm-hmm. And the one of the lessons I guess we have history. You have to excuse me. This is allergy season down here in this part of Texas, and I'm very susceptible. But is it for a society to be successful for very long? It has to be productive. It has to be able to make stuff. It has to be able to produce stuff that actually works and has some kind of real function to it. And I don't know that I don't know that these people have that kind of perspective. Truthfully, they're all wrapped up in another type of ideology that just kind of shoves that off to the side. I think it's almost as if they're in a fantasy world to some extent. But
that sounds like an understatement, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't it? Yes, it does.
I did hear someone else say that. Professor not Milton Friedman, a guy named George Friedman. He writes a bunch of books about geostrategy, and he says, and he's like a university professor. He says the problem with a lot of these kids they've got all their life expectancy was high school plus going to the ultimate fantasy land, university. It's like the university is a completely fantasy kingdom like nothing else you'll see anywhere else, and they spend 4 years there and then they get out and then they start trying, and some of them are going, and that's why we're seeing problems at the New York Times and other places where people have said where they get these editors who just indulge them more, and we're getting these people who believe completely outlandish things and will bully and threaten, push people around, and they just never been told no.
Well, and also I think these type of social planners have had the notion somewhere in in their mind that we can reach a point where it's all going to be all right. And we don't ever reach that point. You know, even when we get to the better place, we have to fight to maintain it. You know, it has to maintain itself. If it's not productive, if it doesn't, you know, create something worthwhile, you know, there's always going to be attacks. You're always going to have to defend yourself. You're always going to have to keep trying to do the next thing. And I think a lot of these people build their philosophy on the standpoint or the thought that they'll get to that place where they can just say, it's all right, you know, and I can just lay back and kick back on the beach and everything's going to be okay. Well, you know, that day's never coming. So you know, you have to constantly understand that life is supposed to be somewhat of a challenge and mostly a struggle.
I can understand people that have been to college thinking this way, but you know, it's a fantasy land. But I'm thinking of Pelosi and Schumer and Biden's administration. They've got to understand that productivity is more than just, well, I mean, it's more than just buying stuff from China and inflating the dollar. I just don't understand why they're doing what they're doing and how they can conceptualize it. It's not enough to just say that they're looking for power. They're actually it seems like they're dismantling society, the very fundamental structures of society, to maintain their power. And they've got to realize that's suicide.
Well, you'd think they would, but I also think there's an awful deep-seated selfish, you know, element to it as well. You know, you're right in that they're trying to maintain their power and they're trying to grow it. But I consider that to just be a tremendously short-sighted, if not selfishness on their part, and people that are that deeply ingrained into the what's happened. You know, they've been up there for 50 years, and I don't think they see a way out. You know, for themselves, to them, that's their world. And I think in some ways they're just trying to maintain their world, you know, if it's a real one or not. You know, they're just trying to maintain it.
It's like driving your car, even though it's past its shelf life, but you're just kind of like putting on a little bit of this and a bit of that and hoping that'll get you the next mile.
And
but
because truthfully, I think right now, unless they can do some major power grab, such as that bill that just failed or something like that, I think they're actually digging their own grave right now. You know, because even people who don't have a very deep background are starting to see through them. You know, some of that's not hard to miss. You know, you can see it, and gradually it starts to show itself. And I think right now they're making some major forced errors, or I should say unforced errors, but because they feel the challenge of the time. You know, I think they actually feel the thing kind of slipping away, you know, to some degree. At least I hope that's what's happening anyway.
You cut out again there, Flicker. Okay, well, we might be giving up on us. You know what? We're getting close to the end of the show here, so I'm just going to ask you one of the old standard questions we used to run by. How did you find Ricochet? Like, where did you find this place?
You know, truthfully, I don't remember specifically. I do remember a couple of articles I saw early on and stuff like that, and then I just kind of saw what the format was. And it was probably, I can't even give you the year, probably 8 or 9 years ago, possibly when I first joined and started to read it. And as far as giving you a specific date and time and anything like that, I couldn't do it. I don't specifically recall. I try to to read as much as I can around these different sites and get kind of a broad perspective from people. But anyway, I was drawn in, at least at that time, probably around, I don't know, I'm gonna say probably the election of 2012 if I had to guess, but that would be a guess, is all it would be.
Okay, well, I think it's been nice having you here, Ole. And one day, Flickr will reestablish his communications. But till then, I think we'll see you all guys later in the comments on Ricochet. Bye-bye.